How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great video coming our way today. We're going to talk about the unspoken truths. 10 questions rookie correctional officers are afraid to ask. My guests today are Joe Pomponio and Russ Hamilton. And guys, don't forget, guys, I have books on the market. Get those books. They got tons of correctional knowledge. The link to all my books are in my description. But now, before we go talk about our topic, let me get our guest on. Let's start off with Russ. What up, Russ?
Hey there, Anthony. How's it going?
Good, Russ. Russ, you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I'm a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I'm also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a private company where we do case management for a local probation department and a local county jail. And I am also the founder of Keepers of Chaos, which is on Facebook. That's chaos with a K. And basically, it's a site that's dedicated to everything that goes on in corrections and, as a support system for anyone that works in the profession, not just those of us who have had badges in the past. And, we just really seek to try and mentor people, give them training, talk about, content, knowledge, everything else that we possibly can to try and make this really tough job a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I've always been meaning to tell you, Russ, chaos on your Facebook page is spelled wrong.
Yes, it is, and it's done for a specific purpose, which I will reveal in the future at some point.
All right, let me get
Joe
on. What up, Joe?
What's happening, guys?
Hey, Joe, you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, sir. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections, 29 years. Currently working as an assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department and jail division, and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
We love to have you. Now, guys, remember, Joe and Russ don't know the questions. To be honest with you, they don't even know the topic. I kind of surprised them. And the reason why I do that is because this is all they have to look forward to in life. So I want to make sure that they can enjoy these moments. No, I'm kidding. Joe's like, what the hell? All right, so I do got 10 questions. I thought we can have some fun and answer them. And hey, guys, real quick, little side note. I'm working on a project with Alfred Street Industries. It's a film production company. They got work like what's it called? Project Runway, Top Chef, Nailed It, Is It Cake, Justin Bieber, Never Say Never. A lot of good work they have. And we're right now looking for a facility who can maybe host us briefly as we film a project there, maybe between 3 to 5 weeks. It's going to require the need of a living space, technically. We need a pod that's isolated from the rest of the facility. And I mean isolated, I mean self-sustaining. It has its own day room, area to eat, rec, because we don't want the participants to go ahead and participate with the inmate population. So if you guys know of a facility or know of anyone that we could speak to, please email me at ganjianthony@yahoo.com, ganjianthony@yahoo.com. And if things work and it is a livable space, we would love to come down to your facility and check it out. All right, so let's get to the first question. First question is, what if I freeze up or panic in a dangerous situation? I wanted to answer this one first because I want to lean on a lesson that Russ gave me a while back. Me and Russ, Joe, we always talk about the what if games and preparing yourself mentally, for what can come, not being afraid to adapt and adjust. And again, it's not always about being ready, because ready is more absolute. It's more about preparing your mindset. And one of the things about corrections is you are going to have to run into some very scary situations. And we're talking about situations that most people would rather run away from. And the funny thing is if you stop and think about it for too much before you go in, what's going to wind up happening is you're going to psych yourself out. And that's where your conditioning comes in. I think, and I don't know if Russ remembers saying this, but it was a great piece of advice that you gave us a while back on this channel that I just want to reiterate right here. But reiterate here, but when you condition yourself, it allows the freedom for your body and mind to kind of act automatically and get you where you need to be. Trust in yourself and not overthink it to the point where you wind up running in the opposite direction. Again, most of the situations that we face in corrections, most people would want to run in the opposite direction. But that's why we train ourselves. We condition our mind and body to push past that hesitation, at least at first, to get us where we need to be, so we can do the job that must be done. So I think for me, if you work on that mindset, condition yourself to be prepared, however that may be, it's going to push you to where you need to be, so you can go ahead and be who you got to be, to that sense. Russ, does that make sense? Does that reflect a little bit of the lesson that you taught so many years ago when you were a young buck of 18?
Yeah, I wish a few years ago I'd been 18, but yeah, there's a lot to be said. We do a lot of different things, when we're, working around, and doing the things that we start doing in the academy.
Turn on watch blue light.
Sorry about that. Anyway, there's a lot of different things that people have to worry about. And one of those things about freezing up, yeah, that happens. But there are ways that you can kind of mitigate against that. So when you first start in this business and you end up trying to get the proper mindset to get in there and actually do something, it can go a long ways toward making you feel like you know what action to take. Now, when you actually get out there and there's a lot of different, competing things that are taking our attention, and we know, maybe a fight has started, maybe somebody has launched some munitions at some inmates or something like that. We have to get into the condition that I call popping the clutch. And popping the clutch is what actually allows you to start your actual response. And it just means taking an action. It can be taking a step forward to the fight. It can be taking a step backward to try and get yourself some strategic distance. It can be keying your mic up to start, being able to, get help there, tell where it is, tell what you need to get there. Some of the other things that might go on, it might mean that you pull your spray and you're ready to deploy it. Maybe you're going to deploy your baton. Maybe you're going to, start giving commands. But whatever you do, it has to have an initial framework for the very first step that you take. And that very first step is the one that counts the most, because that is what allows you to start into motion. It's what stops you from completely freezing up and allows the actions that are about to follow to start to fall into place. And so that's the first thing, that I always taught the new people, is figure out what it is that you're going to do at the beginning of the chain of events that you're about to have unfold for you. And so all of those things, like I say, taking a step forward, taking a step backward, keying your mic, getting ready to deploy your spray, shouting commands, all of those things are the things that pop the clutch and allow you to get in gear. And when you game this out before any of this ever happens, because you should do that, is you should be thinking about what your initial response is going to be. And so, you can think about what you're going to say. Hey, I have 5 inmates fighting, below Tower 4. Make sure that you guys come through the back gate or through culinary or whatever it is, and practice that in your head and know some of the actions that you're going to take, so you can shortcut and not have to make actual decisions until as far down the chain of response as you possibly can. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does 100%. It's, again, I like what you're saying. I mean, somewhere along the line, you got to commit to an action. You got to either step forward and grab that radio. I mean, for me, the scariest thing is if I was working next to somebody and there was an emergency and they froze, I don't know if they're going to go backwards or forwards. I don't know. The only person that truly knows that or will discover that is the person who's frozen. Joe, what's your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, in this profession, everybody's had that moment of freeze, me included. The main thing is to, make it a momentary action. The 1 foot in front of the other is always a good approach. As much as we train and as much as we drill and as much as we do what we do, if you're on a facility that really never ever sees action and something happens, you're going to have that momentary because you got the everybody's in the thought process, holy crap, it never happens here, and here we are. And then from there, okay, we as Russ says, we pop the clutch and move forward, and we deal with the situation. You have other types of freezes where you have momentary freezes that take away from your train of thought, either because of loud noise, because of yelling, because of chemical agents, because of some undetermined factor that you hadn't thought of when you're playing a what if game during this scenario. Everybody has those momentary pauses, but the main thing is to keep moving forward and react. I always said if somebody freezes, somebody that's with me that freezes, I can actually deal with that and train that person to get out of that train of thought. What I never could actually deal with was the ones that just ran the opposite direction. There's not really much you can do with that. The person that freezes, it's an instinctual action, whether it be because of a loud noise, because of an ungodly sight, something that just shocks you to the core momentarily. You can help that person get past that step and learn to react better, react quicker, be more prepared. That's a trainable action to me. Flight is not a trainable action to me. So, if they feel, or if you feel, as a correctional officer that you're going to freeze up, at some point you will, because you're going to see something you haven't seen before. You're going to see and possibly do something that you've never done before. You may be the one that's commanded by your supervisor to fire a 37 millimeter, onto the rec yard. You may be the one that's commanded by the lieutenant to take a shot at an escaping offender. There's going to be all kinds of things that we may momentarily freeze up for. But the main thing is that you perform your job duties, you keep moving forward, and you don't let it rock you to your core.
Yeah, and part of that training too is understanding, because you know yourself best, what's causing the freeze. I mean, did you freeze because you're trying to, like we said, absorb the moment a little bit to see what's going on? Did you freeze because the situation's a bit overwhelming and maybe you want to just have some level of control before you go in? Or did you freeze because at this moment you kind of realizing, like, what the hell did I get myself into? And deep down inside why you froze. And you have to be honest with yourself, because depending on that reason, you're either going to be able to be cultivated to help us, or you can wind up being a liability. And I think what that freeze really means. If it's just
the one thing is too is it's not just for the officers, it's for the supervisors too, because I've been in situations where I've had to escalate things. And I've had that momentary pause because I'm not only thinking about the situation in front of me, I'm thinking about my team behind me. What am I fixing to get these guys into? But I know I got to deal with this situation. So it's not just your frontline correctional officers. Supervisors have that moment of pause too.
Yeah, and I know someone says, you know what, man, sometimes you freeze because there's so many things coming at you at once. You're trying to make the perfect decision. I remember my supervisor telling me, listen, the only decision I need at that moment is a decision to act. I mean, I know it's very, generalized, but I understand what he's saying. Like, move forward. Don't get so caught up where you wind up psyching yourself out. Yeah, that's the concern. Okay, so the next question I got is, how do I earn respect of senior staff without coming across as a know-it-all? I'll start with Joe, then Russ, and I'll finish up.
Well, you know, I remember as a CO coming in, and you know, everybody that comes in out of the academy thinks they know everything they need to know. Um, the best thing you can do is, you know, be trainable, be teachable, be humble. Don't go in thinking that you are a know-it-all. You know, if you have a question, ask the question, but do it with respect. Don't do it with arrogance. And you know, the main thing, you know, is when you're dealing with your senior staff, you know, these guys have been there. They know the job, they know the facility, they know the inmates, they know the layouts. You know, they're senior for a reason. So you know, whatever they are willing to teach you, absorb it, and you know, be willing to be coachable.
True. But what's your thoughts on that, Russ?
So yeah, you know, there's a mindset that, you know, attaches itself to at least, you know, some of the new folk that we get in, where, you know, because they've spent, you know, a lifetime inside school, and you know, they know what the words are inside the book, but they have no context for them as to how they apply into our very disturbed yet real world that we go through in corrections. And so, you know, if you want to, you know, establish the type of rapport that says to people out there, hey, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to work, you know, you have to be willing to, you know, ask questions, follow directions, and be malleable, because, you know, those of us who are good at what we do want to be able to have someone that will mold and teach, and you know, be able to put them on point so that we can, you know, fast track their learning, you know, as quickly as possible. If you're just gonna, you know, constantly, you know, spout back what you learned at the academy, I'm not going to be able to teach you anything. While the academy is foundational, it's also rudimentary, and rudimentary does not cut it in corrections.
Yes. And for my little message, hold on, guys. I gotta get a little water. Swallowed wrong. Hold on. I think for me, I always tell the rookies, sometimes you put such a burden on yourself to be perfect. And that burden to be perfect becomes such a weight to carry that when you come inside the facility, you feel that you have to impress. I mean, that's what you really feel you think you have to do. And then what happens here, you wind up turning yourself off from the want to learn, because you figure, well, I don't need advice from the senior staff because they're going to be judging me. So when they give me advice, it's not because they're giving me advice because I need to grow and learn, but because they're giving me advice because they're passing judgment on me. And that's not the case. And if you're not open to learn from those with experience, and you rather think that it will be better if I could just impress them coming in by, I'm that person, I'm that superstar, you'll find yourself pushing away more senior staff than you will actually inviting them in, because senior staff, I don't care what anyone will tell you, I have never seen a rookie truly impress senior staff on day one. I mean, it truly does take a while for a senior staff member to really be taken back by a rookie, but it doesn't happen right on day one. So don't think that that's something that you're going to accomplish to the point that you carry that burden, and instead of learning, you're looking to impress. It doesn't work that way. All right, let me get to the next one. Russ will have you go first for this one. It says, what should I do if I make a mistake that could have serious consequences? And this is a good question.
So it's the serious consequences part that you really have to, you know, take under consideration. Everyone's going to make some mistakes. But the thing that I would say is this is you need to find someone that can sort that out in a hurry. And so what you have to do is you immediately have to call someone over and advise them, hey, what's going on? This is what I did. I'll never forget that I had the academy at the institution I was at, and I had, oh, I don't know, I probably had like 10 or 11 cadets on my yard, and they were out and they were searching through a dorm. And what had happened is one of the cadets left a flashlight inside that dorm. And so they did the exact right thing. They came and they immediately told me, and thank goodness, because it was something that was ultimately fixable. And, I fixed it in a way that wasn't perfect and was, kind of, oh, shall we say, kind of just like thinking out of the box, but I wanted to get it done and over with and not have to, form up brand new search parties to go do an entire yard of over 1,100 inmates, because that was going to get nasty in a hurry. And so in this particular place, we had found, a little bit of pruno. And so rather than attaching that pruno to someone, I was able to, make a deal where I was able to get the flashlight back and make everyone breathe a little bit easier. And yeah, it cost me some charges on a guy. Yeah, but it was pruno, and pruno's really bad, and everyone knows how dangerous I think it is. But it was not as dangerous as having that flashlight there, where it could be made into a weapon or whatever else could take place there. So what I would say is tell on yourself. Say, hey, I did this, and I don't know necessarily what the consequences are, or maybe you do know the consequences, but believe it or not, there are people that can fix things in ways you wouldn't even imagine possible. And so those things actually have come up a number of times in my career, where a little bit of thinking and bargaining and figuring things out just made the whole difference in the matter. And so tell on yourself, get some good advice, and find someone who knows how to get things back, find things out, and recover items in a hurry, because there are people out there like that.
And Joe, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of go with Russ on that. You got to recognize that you're making a mistake that could have consequences, that could get yourself hurt. Maybe your coworkers hurt. And you got to be able to own that mistake. You definitely have to let somebody know immediately. It may have serious consequences. We all are going to make mistakes at some point in time. The best thing you can do is own it and get in front of it, and definitely let somebody know, because if it can have serious enough consequences, it can affect an entire facility.
Yeah, for me, guys, not to reiterate, but it's the same thing. If I'm looking at it from a leadership perspective on down, you look for two things, right? Integrity and accountability. If you made a mistake and that mistake has serious consequences, you need to do what is correct and report whatever that concern may be, because the problem is that mistake that could be a teachable moment somewhere along the line will now become an integrity issue if you don't take accountability of it, and then you let that mistake get discovered. I know we want to promote an environment that allows for growth on the back end of mistakes or failures, more so if they are reversible. I guess that's the key, if they can be reversed. But in some cases, you're going to make mistakes that have higher consequences because they cannot be reversed. They're irreversible. And at that point, this is where the integrity and the accountability really comes to light. It comes to light when there is consequences that you have to step up. So it's funny how all these people may claim integrity and accountability without the pressure of what that really means. So with that said, this is a good time for you to also showcase that you're willing to take accountability and a level of ownership and maintain that integrity. And I honestly think there will be people that, even though you may have made a mistake, and there will be people that may judge you on the outcome of that mistake, there are also going to be a lot that are going to come back and say, well, you know what, man, that person stepped up too. And it kind of balances things out. And I think, as I said, for management, it truly does, or hopefully could become more of a competency concern. So now we have a teachable moment on the back end of this. as opposed to me questioning your integrity. And at that point here, admitting it after it's been discovered, to me, it just doesn't make you a strong member of the team. So I think that's spot on. That advice there. All right. So the next one, and we'll start with, in this case, we'll start with Joe first. How do I deal with an inmate who tries to test me or manipulate me? Now, granted, I want to mention something here, guys, on this. The reason why I feel like a lot of people believe that this question is not always asked, and I'll just put it out there now, and maybe you guys could toss it around a little bit, is a lot of people will actually take full ownership of an inmate's effort to try to manipulate them, which means that if I was an inmate and I try to manipulate Joe, even though Joe did nothing wrong and Joe does the right thing, Joe begins to be embarrassed to some level that the inmate even went up to Joe to ask, or I even went up to Joe to try to manipulate him. I think some people actually take on a level of shame, even though they didn't do anything wrong, but they take a level of shame because, wow, that inmate came up to me. It must be something. It must be I'm weak. Why didn't they go to Russ? Why didn't they go to Ganji? Why did they come to me? So I think that question sometimes is not asked because the officer or the staff member may actually see the inmate's attempt as a flaw or a vulnerability within themselves. Does that make sense? Anybody? Joe?
Yeah, it makes sense. The main thing when it comes to, dealing with one that you think is manipulating you, number one, if you think he's manipulating you, then you're already ahead of the game. The test is pretty much over because you've already caught on to their act. Main thing is to stand your ground, abide by the policies in your decisions, and stay consistent with it. If you give him an answer today, make sure it's the same answer if he tries it again tomorrow, and same answer if he tries it again the day after. Nothing to be embarrassed about. In this profession, you're going to get tested. You're going to get manipulated. They're going to try you. That's their job. It's their job to try to manipulate you, and it's our job to keep them from manipulating you. So, don't be embarrassed about it. Just stand your ground, abide by policies, rules, and regulations, and you can't go wrong.
Hey, Joe, real quick before we get to the rest on this one, do you think the inmates know that even when they go up to an officer, regardless, again, the officer doesn't commit to what the inmate wants done, but do you think the inmates know that there's a good chance that the officer could internalize it and feel embarrassed just by the inmate approaching them?
I would think so. These inmates, a lot of academies will bring them through a facility for a tour, and right then and there the game starts. The inmates are dressing you up. They're looking at you. They're seeing how you carry yourself. They're looking for weaknesses in your stature. So they already have an idea of who they can get, who they can kind of throw off their game. So yeah, I definitely feel that the inmates have a sense for cadets or new employees that are going to come in, that they can either not so much manipulate them fully, but get them off their game enough to make them second guess themselves.
What's your thoughts, Russ?
So I think there can be an element of that because when you first start out in the profession, you're not used to being to be tested and evaluated and probed for weaknesses and that kind of thing. One thing that I used to teach the cadets that would come on our yard is for them to take control of the situation. And part of the problem is they don't even know what you mean by control. And so I would give them this little kind of, little primer class and say, okay, so they're going to come up to you. They're going to do things, to embarrass you or to test you or to ask you. And it's all part of the game. So if you think that they're doing that, what you do is you prolong the encounter. You start, questioning them as to why they're asking that or what they think about something. And then the next thing you do is you ask them for their ID card. And then that way, who they are, and they don't like that at all. And now they realize that, hey, you've got the ID card in your hand. You can prolong this as long as you need. if they start to put themselves in a position, well, I just want to go, man, or whatever, and you start to think, well, I don't know why you suddenly feel that you need to go. So now maybe what we need to do is, do a quick little, pat down search. And what you do is you take control of the situation, you prolong the contact. It makes them really uncomfortable. And then what have you done? You've manipulated them, and everyone else around them is probably less likely to approach you just to test you. And they may be more likely to approach you for, for an actual legitimate need. And so, I always spent a lot of my time programming inmates in my vicinity to react to me in a certain way. And so, if they felt like they had a legitimate something, I would deal with that with them, right? If they were coming up and running some kind of bullshit, they knew better than to approach me. And then if they were doing something really, truly wrong, I could usually get them to overreact and put them in a position that I would find their contraband. So that was just kind of my little mini class that I would give people on this.
Yeah, I think for me, the obvious answer is put the scarlet letter on the individual. If you know they're testing you, write it up, document it, pass it to whoever it's got to go to up the chain of command, and make it known what this inmate tried to do, because sometimes they're testing you and they're hoping that there's no follow-up. No, you got to put the scarlet letter on that individual because it teaches people to kind of have that extra precaution. But I do want to mention one other thing too. So we talk about in corrections, you got to embrace conflict, which is key. Sometimes when you're being tested by an inmate because it's obvious and it's there, it's easier to kind of lean into the challenge and, call the inmate out on what they're doing. You got to do that. But sometimes when you feel it, but it's not so obvious, but you feel it, something's going on, that's when you really have to just bring that up to the surface. That's when you have to, like Russ said, I love what Russ said. That's why I'm kicking off that is the prolonged engagement allows you to bring whatever that game is to the surface, which a lot of people, sometimes what happens is when the game is very subtle, they kind of get caught in how they feel, but they don't address that feeling. They let the feeling subside and they walk off. It's like, no, your body's telling you something. Your mind's telling you something, and then you freeze. You don't do anything about it. No, the moment your body's telling you something, your mind's telling you something, then you confront the inmate with it. I'm sorry, what were you saying again? And how is that relevant? Where are you going with this? I noticed you had a concern, and all of a sudden you started talking about very subtly about a lawyer. I'm sorry, what's your lawyer got to do with this conversation again? I'm not understanding why you brought the lawyer into this dialogue just now, or whatever it is, usually those subtle remarks that are more of an exchange of power dynamic. I think in corrections, that's something that we get tested on a lot, where we know we have the authority and the inmates kind of know their place. But the question is, have we both accepted it? Have I accepted my authority? Have they accepted their place to be compliant? And once in a while, not so overt, but it's when the inmates subtly knock on that door by adding little caveats to things like, outside pressure, or, I'll see what the sergeant has to say. Maybe they'll see things different. Just little subtle things to test where you stand. And to be honest with you, if this is the case here, how do I deal with inmates who try to test me or manipulate me? That's your moment to actually embrace and reinforce what you're about. I think that's key too. It's okay to be tested. It's going to happen. You can't control that. But I would take advantage of the opportunity and reinforce what you're about. And then that will actually give you more confidence later on. So you should welcome getting tested, because that gives you the opportunity to be better, I'm assuming. All right, let's see. Next one. And we'll go with Russ first. Russ, what if I don't feel mentally or emotionally strong enough for this job?
This job, you reach, a point very fast, where you start, questioning it, because it's a difficult thing to get into. It's a difficult commitment. And, I think that if you have doubts like that, those are natural. I think that you have to let it run its course to where your decision is not made on if you think that you might or might not be, but whether you are or you aren't. And that's something that's far more decisive and indicative of whether or not you're going to continue, because everyone has had those doubts. Everyone has been worried that they're not going to measure up. Somewhere along the line, though, you start to get the hang of things. You start to understand the dynamics of the situation that you're in, hopefully at least. And then you start to proceed and progress and produce. And when you do those things, then you start to realize, hey, I'm becoming a competent officer. Maybe I do have enough, game to be able to make this thing play out. Or you won't progress, you won't proceed, and you won't be able to produce. And when that happens after a little bit more prolonged period of time, for me, I think it took about a year. Then you're going to know that, hey, you know what? Maybe this really isn't for me, or you should actually proceed to, hey, I know this isn't for me, and then you should find, your parachute, your way out. But just mere lack of confidence or questioning yourself at the beginning is perfectly natural. And you know what? It's stepping up and growing into the responsibility that really counts, because no one is a natural in this.
Yeah, this is before I get to Joe real quick, Russ, you're so spot on, because when we're answering this question, guys, I know that there's a lot of external concerns right now, understaffed facilities, obviously overworked staff, bad management, whatever, and we could stay and focus on that. But the point is, we've done shows like this before, and as of now, those are circumstances that are out of our control. So with that said, the only thing we can control, as mentioned before in other shows, is our own effort and attitude. And Russ, I like how Russ answered that, because Russ stayed focused on the job and what's expected of you. And I thought that was great, because I think that's what this question is about. And I wanted to add one thing before I get to Joe, because maybe Joe could add a little something to this too, as well, is we're going to go through moments in corrections that it could get at you. It could take the soul right from you. But they're moments. And with that said, I truly do believe that you could decide whether you're going to allow this to be just a moment, or you're going to allow this to be something long-term in which you start to accept and then eventually turn into being hopeless. So I think sometimes the emotional or mental exhaustion of the job, of course, is relevant. It's there. But sometimes it's also could be us, taking a small problem and making it bigger, or taking something that's really short term and making it long term. Again, I have to put some onus back on us. And again, that's not to minimize everything else that's happening. But if you're going to make an effort to change, especially into a situation that you cannot control, the effort to change comes from within. What do I have to do in my reaction so I don't trap myself? Because at the end of the day, it's easy to trap yourself, accept things, and then become hopeless. So I would say, if you're going through a concern, how are you labeling that concern? Is it a concern that you're just going to kind of push down, accept, and just pile it on to other negativity? Or are you going to try to do your best to at least manage your reactions so you don't fall into some level of hopelessness? Because I know it sounds crazy. And I hope nobody takes it the wrong way, but I think it's easier to fall into a sense of hopelessness than it is to fight and look for hope. That's my opinion on that. What's your thoughts on that, Joe? Because there's a lot there.
And that's very true, Anthony. It's so easy to fall into the hopelessness and emotional turmoil over the negativity than it is to find the positives. And that's what determines it. I always told the cadets, you're going to have some bad days ahead. The main thing is that you control it. Don't let it control you. Once you make it past your first year on the job, you've pretty much seen what you need to see. There's not much more you can expect. So you have seen all aspects of a prison environment. So therefore, what you need to do. By this point, you should be confident. You should be, emotionally fit for the job. Mentally, that's kind of a that's kind of iffy thing, because we see things on a daily basis that kind of throw us off our game sometimes. But the main thing is, if you feel like that you're losing the battle emotionally, or that you're not mentally or emotionally strong enough to carry the job on, it's because you're focusing too much on the negatives and not the positives. It's one of those, you don't let it control you, you control it. If it's something that you've seen, that's bugging you, tell somebody. It may be something that's fixable. It may be just something that you just need a little verbal guidance, maybe a little additional training. It could be something totally fixable. It's not something that's so hopeless that you spiral out of control and climb down into a dark pit over.
Yeah, and guys, just for this section here, this question here, sometimes what gets to me, and I don't know if this could be universally applied, but I definitely want to put out there, is that sometimes we will blame everything external for everything that's going on. And the problem is, when you sit there and blame everything external, then it does fall into some level of hopelessness, because you're blaming things on maybe situations that you cannot change, and then you find a comfortability in accepting that. And then the next step of accepting that is falling into that level of hopelessness. And I do truly believe that you can't do that. You have to understand that at some point, even through all this negativity, we do have choice in how we respond. And that puts a level of accountability on us. So when you have a lot of people blaming everything else, sometimes it does take a stronger supervisor to pretty much say, however harsh it's got to be, but, well, what are you doing about it? Are you going to choose to live your life this way, or are you going to choose to maybe shift a perspective? Because at the end of the day, guys, you can't just settle. If it's not something you want, then you have to try to make an effort to, figure out what you're going to do, or else you will remain trapped and you'll repeat the pattern and then still blame everybody else for it. Let's see. Next one. All right, so we'll go with Joe first and Russ. How do I balance authority and approachability with inmates? All right, we'll go with Joe, then Russ.
The short answer, number one, the most important to me is tact. It's not what you say, it's about how you say it. You can deliver authority without sounding like a hard ass. You can have a sternness to your voice and the way you apply it. But when you're using authority, use it professionally. Don't use it with arrogance. I've always told the cadets, the inmates know that you guys run this facility. They know that you guys are the authority. Therefore, you don't have to go down there with arrogance and flaunt it. You don't have to go down there with arrogance and for a lack of a better term, what I used to call rub your nuts on them. Because they already know that, regardless of whatever situation takes place, we're going to win regardless. So, when you approach inmates, do it with a respect factor. I'm not saying you have to coddle these inmates, but you do have to communicate with them. So, communicate professionally and, use your authority in a way that, you gain respect for yourself and you gain respect for others.
I agree. And Russ, what's your thoughts on this, Russ?
So I think that, the first thing that you should recognize when you're dealing with inmates like this is that there's truly a power imbalance, right? You wield everything over them, and there's not much that they can do about it except act out, lash out, get mouthy, attack you, all of those things. But if you're willing, to approach them at a level where at least, you act like there is no, huge power imbalance, they will tend to be more compliant. But they will also tend to be less compliant the further up the chain you go, as we talk about, levels, whether it's level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. At level 4, you're always going to, receive the most amount. And if we're talking about a max inmate rather than just like general population level 4, then the amount that they're going to resist you is going to be a lot higher. So we always start with that base level, though, because that's where we want to be. We want to seek cooperation before compliance, and then we want compliance, and then we want compulsion, right? So I always think of it in those the three C's, if you will. So when I teach that to people, I tell them, okay, we start out at this low base, and what we want to do is we want to say, hey guys, move away from the wall, or move back away from the door, and we do it in a method where we are asking, we are requesting their compliance. And do we have to do that? Of course not, and there are times where that's not even appropriate. There may be times where we have to give immediate orders in order to save lives. But that's not what I'm talking about in this case right here. So we start at that lowest base, and it's the ask, right? And so most of the time, guess what? You're going to get compliance, and that's good, right? You're going to get, or I should say, cooperation, right? So cooperation. And so then when we go up to that next rung, right, that's the part where you start to have to command, or what we call the tell, right? And so we are going to tell you, move away from the door. We might have to get to the point where we say, move away from the door now, or we may have to say, move away from the door, or I'm going to spray you. So now we've gone from just asking for compliance to the point where we're actually getting to the point where it's compulsion, right? And we're going to go to that final point where we have to go. And some days some days or weeks or months, you may never use that. But then there might be times where, you're having it happen 3 or 4 times a day. So that's what we do. We ask, we tell, and then we make, right? But we always want to try and tend toward the lower end of that, right? The ask part, the part where we're getting the cooperation, right? And so that's just the way I would put it to you. So if you're a brand new cadet, or you're a brand new boot on the ground, there, just think of it in those terms. Cooperation, compliance, and then compulsion, and that will solve most of the problems that you have, because now, instead of just wondering what you should do, you have a framework to hang it on. You have a way to think about this, going from the abstract to the concrete, because I just gave you a little lesson.
Yeah, it's a great lesson. I mean, for me, it's funny because this question is asked a lot by rookies, and looking back, because we've done shows on this before, where we ask ourselves, what do we expect our rookies to know going in? And then what do we have to cultivate? And that's a hard question to ask when you already got 20 something years in and you're trying to remember how it was for you on day one. But this question does come up a lot, because I think when rookies come in, they believe they have to be aggressive. And therefore, when they're aggressive, they equate being aggressive with authority, which we know that's not the case. That's actually more emotional. And then therefore, somehow or another, they believe that they have to be this level all the time, which if I'm at this level all the time, how am I going to be approachable? And I can tell you right now, authority and aggression are not the same. Actually, we talked about this before, where authority is kind of, the extremes of authority really are in being assertive and being professionally empathetic. Emotions may start to come in as, I guess, further outliers if it falls into aggression and being extremely sympathetic. But with that said, when it comes to balancing authority and approachability, I would move authority away from aggression and put it more towards that scale that I just mentioned. And I think that's a scale that inmates will respect, and that's a good thing. So with that said, like we talked about just now, it's you're not there to be aggressive and hide behind your uniform and bark out orders like you're Hitler. No, you're there to maintain control when needed. But like we said, but it doesn't mean you're, on level 10 all day. Like Russ said, most of the time you ask and you get cooperation, and only very rarely are you going to have to get to a point where you're pushing past compliance to compulsion. So I think, to be honest with you, if it gets to that point where you're aggressive and you're pushing past the compliance point to compulsion, I'm not looking for approachability. I'm looking to get the job done. All right, let's see. That's a good one. And that question is asked a lot, but I think it's because of how they equate authority with aggression. I think that I think is a concern. We'll start with Russ first on this one. What should I do if I see a coworker doing something unethical or unsafe? So two different things there.
Yeah, two very different things. So this is what I'll say, and let's attack the safety aspect first. Is what, when you start out and you're early in this profession, what you perceive as being unsafe may not be so. There might be other considerations that officer or staff member is taking into consideration with respect to what they're doing. So I would not jump to any conclusions. I would find out. I would ask them. I would try and see what's going on first, because really you don't have a broad enough base of experience to make such a judgment in that fashion. And so I think that's a pretty easy way to go with regards to the safety. Now, the unethical one is a lot more problematic, right? Number one, because it may also fall into that same thing with regards to safety. You may not understand that what they're doing is ethical, or it's within the guidelines, or it's within the bounds, but it may not be. And so if we assume that, hey, you're right, what they're doing is unethical, then I have to think about, hey, what is this degree? If it's something where they are placing people's lives and stuff in jeopardy, it's time to get behind, dial the phone, get some help, and do something about it. If it's something otherwise minor that's not going to impact people negatively, I think that you have to address it because of the seriousness of the job that we have, but it may not be necessary to do it within that moment. It's difficult to say, but I talk to a lot of different officers who have a lot of different ways of looking at things. And so ultimately, when we talk about ethics, we all have to kind of have the same canon, if you will, of those things. And so that's why I always talk about our North Star is always going to be our oath, right? That which we swear, hey, to the Constitution of both the state and the United States, and that we have to understand that we do not get to pick whose rights we help protect. You can call it fortunate or unfortunate, that most of the time it's inmates that we're talking about, but you have to ensure their rights. You don't get the choice. You don't get to pick winners and losers. You don't get to pick whose rights you enforce and those who you don't. You have to be, fair and balanced and follow the laws and the dictates. And so, what, as distasteful as it may be at times, you may have to point the finger. And I know that people are going to come unglued and call people snitches or this, that, and the other thing. And it's just completely wrong. You should not think of someone as snitching on you. You should think about what you did that was wrong, that required that person to stay true to what they're doing, and why you fell so far short in doing what you should have been doing. So I know it's a whole can of worms, but you know what? That's the way it is, because I would rather have people, shoot as high as they possibly can and possibly miss than just decide to take the low road all the time and know that sooner or later you're going to be taken out in handcuffs. We already saw what the Robert Brooks things cost those people in New York, and you know what? Too bad for them. Someone should have stood up. Someone should have done something. It's not like I necessarily like everything an inmate does, but you know what? I swore that I was going to try and protect that inmate's rights, even if I detest him. And so guess what? You know what? I'm a man of my word, and that's what I did my whole career.
What's your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, number one, you got to think to yourself, how long have I been here? Am I witnessing something that actually is unethical or unsafe? Am I sure this is unethical or unsafe? I've had correctional officers come to me, with a hypothetical situation. If I seen somebody do this, what do I do? And we'd kind of break the scenario down. Seeing somebody do something unethical is probably the lower end of the spectrum. It's not a good part of the spectrum, but it's still lower end of the spectrum versus unsafe. Unsafe to me is something that's totally blatant, that can compromise the security of the institution, could affect somebody's health, get somebody hurt. Something unethical, is something that's probably in a gray area somewhere that's not defined by a policy or procedure. It just hasn't been discussed by ethical, some sort of ethical advisory committee. I don't know if y'all states have them, but we have them here for TDCJ, and it's a committee that will field ethical questions and answer them, because these are questions that aren't defined by policy. And really aren't so far out in left field that it's a danger, but it's something that probably shouldn't be done, just as precautionary. So, if you think you've seen something unsafe or unethical, I wouldn't consider myself a snitch. But at the same time, I wouldn't be hesitant on maybe talking to a supervisor and giving him a what if scenario, just to see what their response is, to maybe kind of give you a little bit of guidance of see if your thinking's on the right track or not.
Yeah, and for me, guys, I think we kind of covered the answer there. I mean, obviously, Russ and Joe kind of said the same thing here, which is great. Is at some point you got to address it. I think the concern that we have that both you guys mentioned was recognizing it. And obviously that's where you could approach the situation with curiosity first, ask questions to try to get an understanding of what you're looking at. And then, find someone that you have a good rapport with, an officer, who your field training officer, whoever you got, and run it by them. Try to provide them as much context as you can. So, it's not like what we said. It's not just seeing the action, but, what's the context of the situation? What was happening during that time? What was that officer doing when these things were happening or whatnot? So I think it's more of, at first, unless it's obvious, because there's a lot of obvious things too that doesn't require any discernment. It's there. But sometimes, like Russ said and Joe said, you're new. So there are certain practices or things that you'll see that you may look at and say, wow, that's not what policy says. And oh my God, now you're making this whole place unsafe. And sometimes people think, well, if it's unsafe, it's unethical. And the way they equate this whole domino stuff is insane. But I think if you approach it with a level of curiosity for the things that aren't so obvious and so surface, and then be able to go ahead and find someone you can connect to who can help provide you context. That's the key. I think that's what Russ and Joe are also trying to say, is that sometimes when we say that you may not understand fully what you're looking at, it's because I don't think you're at that point to see things contextually yet. I think that's something that does come through experience and time. Like, I mean, you can see things in front of you, but to see how things apply to a bigger picture, that takes years and years of experience. So sometimes when we are looking to try to understand a concern, it's more of us trying to understand the situation and all the moving parts, where Russ could walk in a unit and see the whole puzzle because he's seen it 20 million times before. Where me, I'm new and I'm still trying to put it together piece by piece. So when I don't have the whole puzzle, each piece has a different meaning for me than it would for Russ. Russ knows where the pieces are going, and I'm still trying to figure it out.
You know, I real quick, Anthony, if you don't mind, I got one good example I can kind of throw out there. I had an officer come to me one time, you know, on the cell blocks, you know, they run what they call ins and outs every hour. You know, they'll let a row in and let a row out. Officer comes to me. They were training with an officer, you know, that I put them with, an FTO officer, or we'll just say it's an FTO officer. So this officer in particular ran in and out to the day room, and they let one row go back in and they rolled 2 row out, let them go to the day room. And generally, you know, the standing rule is that you don't, once you rolling out, you don't let the inmates go back to their cell for anything. They're in that day room for that hour. Well, this particular officer let an inmate go back to their cell. And so, you know, the trainee comes to me and says, "Hey, Lou, look, I got a question. I know you said that, you know, the standing rule is once you rolling out and put them in the day room, they don't get to go back to their cell for anything. They, you know." And I said, "Okay." And said, "Well, this officer let an inmate go back to their cell." I said, "Well, do you know who the inmate was?" And they told me who the inmate was. And I kind of already knew where this was going. So I found out, you know, later that the officer had allowed a diabetic inmate to go into the day room, but he forgot to grab his glucose tube to take with him. So that officer allowed, you know, escorted that inmate back to the cell so they can get his glucose tube and go back to the day room so he can have his hour in the day room. So I kind of had to explain to the officer. I said, generally, yes, that is a standing rule, and we generally don't allow it. However, this inmate's diabetic, and, you know, he's medically ordered to have his glucose tube with him at all times. And he forgot to grab it on his way out. So the officer allowed him to go back, you know, escorted him back to his cell to get that glucose tube. You know, so the officer, you know, initially thought that this officer was breaking protocol, breaking policy, you know, going against the grain, and kind of when it was at the, you know, once everything was explained, they kind of understood. Because when you come into this profession, nobody told, you know, nobody told me that we had a penitentiary full of diabetic inmates. You know, I never dealt with diabetes until I entered the profession. You know, didn't know how to handle it, didn't know what to do with it. So, you know, just having a good open line of communication, having somebody that can approach you with questions, and sometimes they're answers that that make the scenario a little bit better for them.
That's why it's good we have this channel, because we give people not just advice, but we figure it out, and then we try to find areas in our experience where we've applied it. 3 more. I'll go with Russ first and Joe, if that's okay. How do I handle feeling out of place or like I don't belong?
That's a really good one, because, you know, I've actually, you know, handled that fairly recently with an officer that was asking me about that, because what we do in corrections is sometimes really alien to things that, you know, happen in the normal world. It's a completely, you know, different set of priorities. It's a completely different, you know, set of reality, if you will. And one of the things that we're really bad about in corrections is not welcoming people immediately. We stand off and we wait and see how they're going to fit in. We wait and see how they're going to react to situations. We put them into situations that are sink and swim rather than you know, teach, which is something that, you know, we should always be doing. We should be trying to teach people so that they're not sinking or swimming, so that they're, you know, learning you know, new methods of propelling themselves through the water, as it were. And so people are often, you know, kind of, you know, flummoxed by just, you know, people being standoffish. And so we're often our own worst enemies. So if you want to, get to the point where you feel that you belong, I would just say that, you have to feel that your contribution to the shift work that you're doing has value, that it has value to the peers around you, that it has value to your supervisors, that it has some value to the inmates, and that you're able to start appreciating what it is that you do. Sometimes some people are slow to start out of the gates, as it were, and they're not sure, and they're burdened with maybe overthinking things a little bit, and so they don't immediately feel that sense of belonging, or that sense of what they're doing holds value. I will tell you that over time, almost always it will come to you, and things will suddenly start to click. I often tell people, it took me a while to really, start getting the feel for what I was doing. And then once it started coming to me, all of a sudden, I mean, it was after a year, but suddenly I started becoming the go-to guy on several different things. And I didn't even feel I had, enough experience, but, I started to gain a little bit of a reputation. And after that, I started to feel that I was fitting in. I started to feel that I had a lot of value to offer different situations. I started, coming into my own, and getting some busts under my belt, and diffusing some really violent and dangerous situations. And then that began to really, snowball and take effect. And I learned more and more about what I was doing. And then from that point on, I felt comfortable in my skin after that. So it's a process. It's not an event. It is a process. And so you have to just, wait for that event to unfold. And for me, that event unfolded over, decades, and I always felt I was learning something new. I always felt I was better than I was the day before. And I would hope everyone would experience that, but it does take effort.
Yes, effort's the key word. Effort over outcome. Hey, what's your thoughts on this, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, everybody that starts off in a new profession kind of has that feeling of, they don't belong. They think they're being isolated, alienated, and sometimes it is the case. I guess it all depends on how you project yourself initially. First impressions are everything. I found that, my first probably 6 months, I really didn't associate with really much anybody. I just continued to go to work every day. I told myself that I had a job to do. I'm getting paid to do. I'm not getting paid to worry about everybody else's feelings at that moment. But, one thing you got to understand is, being new to the profession, you're feeling your way around, and, some of the senior staff and the older hands there are kind of watching you and feeling you out to see, how you're going to progress and how you're going to act. I don't think a lot of the times that it's that the person is being made to feel out of place or that they don't belong. I just think there's that awkward period where, everybody's kind of standoffish with you because they don't know you. They don't know anything about you. They don't know your mannerisms. They don't know how you work. They don't know your ethics, and once you kind of, I found that a lot of the folks that, had come to me and felt that way were these are the ones that are always quiet during the shift briefings, never say nothing, never answer questions or participate, or, these were the people that were kind of stuck in their own shell, so to speak. So I kind of took them as a pet project to kind of get them out of their shell and get them more interactive with the staff, make sure that they were part of, the chow hall movements and stuff like that. And helping, when we're doing a targeted shakedown, or, just something to kind of make them feel included. But at the same time, the other staff kind of welcomes them into the fold and makes them feel part of the team when they accomplish something together as a group. So, if you feel like you don't belong or you feel like you're out of place, just give it some time. Don't stress over it. Don't let it worry you to death. Like I said, it may be just a period of people filling you out. If you're one of those that come to work and you're always quiet and you don't say much, come out of your shell a little bit, communicate. Most conversations start with a simple hello or how are you? What's going on? And it kind of goes from there.
Yeah, guys, the want to belong is a very powerful feeling. I mean, it's actually one of the needs in Maslow's hierarchy. And I actually went through this. I think it can happen at any point in your career, but like we said, probably mostly, definitely at the very beginning. And I think the reason why is because you're still trying to determine who you are, who you need to be, and then trying to fit in that trial, in that era, and maybe I want to be like them and try to go ahead and squeeze in, and you're not like them. I remember when I worked at the female facility, for the most part, I had a great experience, but there were a few officers that were a bit aggressive in their tone, not physical aggressive, just aggressive in their tone. And I remember they were just yelling all the time. And I remember coming home, telling my wife that I don't know if I could do this every day for 8 to 16 hours a day, because that's not me. And the funny thing is, when you're surrounded by these individuals for a good portion of the day, there's no escaping it. So you think that this is going to be what the career is going to be like until you decide to try to step into who you need to be. So I think when we get stuck into this feeling of out of place, it could also be because we're spending time looking at all these other variables, trying to get that to determine who we need to be, when technically we do that. And I think once you determine who you need to be in this profession based on the qualities that you want to set forth, it's like this world opens up for you. It invites like-minded people. You're settled into something that is an anchor for you. And then eventually the people that come your way are usually going to be like-minded people, or you have such a strong enough anchor in who you are that you're able to push the people away that don't fit the qualities that you are looking to express. So, or that resonate with you. And I think that's true. I think for people that may have feelings that they're out of place or that they don't belong, I think once they put their feet down firmly in the ground of who they want to be, those feelings aren't as heavy. And then eventually the universe unfolds in their favor. But if you're just still trying to figure it out, you got to assume in your effort to figure out the universe is all over the place. Of course, you're not going to know who you are or feel out of course, you're going to feel out of place because you don't know who you are. All right, next one. So I'm going to put that on the individual a little bit. We'll go with Joe first and Russ. 2 more questions left. How do I deal with the pressure of knowing my decisions can impact someone's life? Real quick, Joe, maybe you and Russ can lean on to this. I definitely, believe it or not, I felt that as an officer the moment they gave me authority, and I knew I had influence on the inmate population. But the funny thing is, when they gave me the authority, coming out of the academy, and they pretty much present you with this role and you have the authority over the inmates, it's presented in a way where it's more of direct control, compliance, stuff like that. But then when you become a supervisor, or then when you become, I guess in my case, prison management, now the authority, now the decisions really lean on, the safety and well-being of others. But even as a rookie, I don't want to minimize that. I know sometimes people, and when I say authority, I'm equating authority to decision-making, because at some point, if you have authority and you're making a decision, people will have to follow that decision. That's how I connected authority and decision. But I want people to realize something. When you're given this authority, it's not just about you having authority to get the inmates to do what you want them to do, but rather you have the authority over them to make decisions that can ultimately be beneficial for them to some extent, or could be detrimental. And how do you deal with that if you're making, you got to make decisions with the weight of how impactful those decisions could be. So I'll go with Joe first and Russ.
Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily have to be a supervisor to have an impact on somebody's life. I mean, we wake up every day and we have an impact on somebody's life in some way, shape, or form. You know, people who decide they want to drive under the influence, you know, they deal with the pressure by drinking and driving, knowing they can impact somebody's life. You know, it's no different for anybody else. I mean, you know, as a rookie, you know, you can absolutely make decisions that impact somebody's life. You may forget to lock a day room door. You may forget to secure a door or a gate or padlock, or you know, they're the things that we do. You know, the way we carry ourselves, our actions, anything and everything that we do has the ability to impact somebody's life. You know, the main thing is that you recognize what you're doing when you're performing your job functions, you know, in security. You know, make sure that you're making good sound decisions, and you don't have to worry about the pressures of you know, having an impact on somebody else. You know, for supervisors, we're one of the frontline supervision is the most influential when it comes to dealing with, you know, the frontline officers. You know, every decision that we make has the ability to, you know, impact one person or the entire shift. So, you know, again, you have to recognize the decisions that you're making. You have to be able to take the time to evaluate the outcome and the possible outcome and scenarios as to, you know, how they could affect people. You know, you have supervisors who are gung ho, shoot gas first and ask questions later. You know, the ones that are all you know, always in for a spontaneous use of force. Sometimes unwarranted uses of forces. And I mean, look at the Brooks. You know, one decision impacted how many lives? You know, because one person got emotionally charged. You know, his actions caused, you know, 7 or 8 other people to become affected. And, you know, by following the leader, because they thought that was a good decision because the initial person made that decision. So, you know, you just need to recognize the actions that you're taking. You know, take the time to understand that, you know, everything that you do in the field of corrections can impact somebody, not just your coworkers, but the inmates. It can affect your supervisors. It can affect the culture of the facility. You know, it can go on and on. You know, dealing with the pressures of that. You know, we deal with the pressures of decision makings every day that can have an impact on somebody's life. What if I don't stop at the stop sign? You know, what if I try to go around the school bus? You know, we all do things that can has the ability to impact somebody's life. But you know, the whole frame of the scenario is the fact that you need to take the time to realize that what you're doing or what you're about to do could have an impact.
What's your thoughts, Russ?
So when I see the, you know, the way this is, you know, laid out, you know, how do I deal with the pressure of knowing my decisions can impact someone's life? So I'm going to tell you that, in my opinion, if you feel that you're under so much pressure with regards to someone else's life, you're probably going to spend a lot of time wringing your hands, and you're probably going to spend a lot of your time making really marginal decisions. And the more marginal decisions that you rack up, the more likely you are to negatively impact someone's life. And what I'm saying is that I'm not saying that you shouldn't evaluate the things that you should do. I'm not saying that you shouldn't assess situations. What I'm saying is that you need to be in a good enough position that you make the decision, that you wrangle the outcome that you can get from it the best way that you can, and that you don't dilly around trying to come up with a really good, perfect decision that ends up being marginal, that ends up getting someone hurt. And so, I'm not a big fan of just succumbing to the pressure and worrying about it and wringing your hands all the time. You just have to be able to, step forward, step up, and do what needs to be done in the moment. And that's my view of this, and that's what I decided, like when I was looking at that I wanted to say. There's a lot to unpack there, and so I just think that you should be under advisement that too much hand wringing, especially over the course of a career, is going to really truly impact the stress that you feel, because you're going to know that a lot of your decisions have been marginal.
Yeah, and guys, keep this quick. This is the reality of the job. I mean, you're entering a profession in which you're a first responder. I mean, your decisions will impact others, and the question is, are you ready for that level of responsibility? I just want to mention it's not always life-saving decisions either. Sometimes it's just decisions about who you want to be. If you're in a position to have influence over others, then you should be very wary of the decisions that you make that reflect who you want to be and how you are seen. So it's not always, when you look at the impact, I mean, you could look at impact as life or death, of course, the tactical side, I guess, or you could look at it as, a reflection of if I'm in this profession and people are going to look up to me, and I do want to be a role model to some extent. I want to carry my job with the highest level of professionalism. Then I have to be very wary about the decisions I make about how I'm seen and who I am and my behaviors behind that wall. So I would say there's pressure on that every day, because at the end of the day, corrections, it can get the best of you, but you can't allow it. So you have to make the decision every day to be intentional with this profession, and be that person that people not just want to be around, but trust in you to do the job when the job is needed. All right, last one, guys. We'll start with Russ first, then Joe. What if I lose my temper or struggle to control my emotions? And this happens a lot.
So this is where practice is a good thing to do. And practice and drills and understanding what your actions are going to be, rather than being reactive, actually just merely responding. Because if you just go in there, and I can be a hothead, I freely admit that, but I also know that that I have a role to play in what the outcome of things are. And so that tends to temper that. And that means that I tend to, try and respond within the bounds of policy, procedure, state law, case law, all of that good stuff. If you are worried about, having, flashing over, suddenly getting into a rage, then what you should try and do is you should probably try and make that work for you rather than against you. And when we're prepared, and when we're preparing and we're teaching ourselves how to get into this profession and deal with really, hugely recalcitrant inmates, as it were, we want to be able to communicate. We want to be able to take action, and we want to be able to see things through from beginning to end. And so the position from which you start in an incident and the position where you want to end up, you should do things to align with that. And that has to be a conscious effort. And, I can't tell anyone, just push it down and just deal with your anger, because that's not the way human beings work. What I can tell you is leverage your anger, leverage the amount that you're pissed off, and really work it to try and actually render a good outcome. And if you're really, really good at it and you become really, really proficient at it, the long game, How is it, what is the old Klingon saying, revenge is a dish best served cold. You can often get there, but it takes a lot more thinking and it takes a lot more 4D chess. So just be advised of that and practice. And practice in drills, but also practice in low impact incidents, as I used to call them. Things where you're just having to really dig in and deal with a person who doesn't necessarily present a huge threat, but they present rather kind of an ingrained challenge, if you will, the kind of thing where you're able to actually turn it around. And when you're actually able to practice on people like that, you get better and better and more proficient. And so, but don't lose your cool, because sometimes that's exactly what the inmate wants, because then he's gonna be able to manipulate you and maybe throw some paperwork on you, maybe get you to throw a cheap shot on him, and then where are you? You're without a career, you're in bracelets, because you've done something stupid, done something silly. Thinking man's game. Always have this, be in control, not the rage, not the feelings, the logical, rational faculty.
Love it. And what do you got, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, when you're in an emotionally charged situation, if it's a verbal altercation with an inmate, I always practiced, the more pissed off he got, the more humorous I got, because number one, I was never going to let them see me sweat. You're not gonna get my goat. I'll have yours long before you have mine. Sometimes tempers do get lost. It happens. It shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen often, but it does. The only thing you can really do is practice your, approach to a situation. Practice your verbal intervention skills. We used to do it in the academies. I would have my sergeant, dress up as an inmate, and we would do role play scenarios with each and every trainee, just to kind of push them to their limits, just to see where their limits are, just so we know where their limits are, and then they know where their limits are. Because some of them, most people don't know what your limits are until you're put there. So, work on yourself, number one. Number two, never, let yourself get to a point where you're going to lose your temper, because it never leads anywhere good. I've had times where officers have, stepped in for other officers because they've seen it kind of getting out of control. So they would step in and allow that other person to kind of walk away, get a breath, and, kind of let the adrenaline wear down a little bit and kind of regain themselves. It's hard to keep yourself under check sometimes, but it's something that we have to practice, in a correctional setting. If we lose our temper, we can over escalate a situation, make a mountain out of a molehill. So, work on yourself, practice your verbal verbal intervention skills with people, and just recognize the signs of, when a situation is fixed to go south for you.
Yeah. And guys, you can't manage inmates through emotion.
No.
I think we've discussed this before. I did a video the other day about maturity in corrections, and the big thing about that is making sure that you remove emotions from what needs to be done at the job. I mean, correctional objectives, enforcing rules and policy and procedure, whatever it is, directives, are not conditional based on people's emotions. I mean, sometimes you can find people so overwhelmed with emotions that they wind up, leading that way, managing inmates that way. I say that the best way to maintain your authority is somewhere between being assertive and professionally sympathetic. And the outliers of that, where it starts to cross into emotion, is aggression on one side and overly sympathetic on the other. And all that does is make your ability to manage inmates a little bit more difficult, because it becomes conditional and consistent. Maybe I'll enforce this rule today because I'm pissed, or maybe I won't enforce this rule with Russ because I like him. it just becomes conditional because you're ruling on emotion and not really through that prescribed professionalism. And as it comes for temper, I'm going to be honest with you. If you got a hot temper here and you lose it quick in this profession, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to get someone killed, get yourself killed, get yourself hurt, whatever it is, because if you do not have control of yourself, like Russ said, harness the energy, find somewhere else to use it, then there's no way I would ever put you in charge of controlling other individuals. And I think that's what you'd see a little bit in the Robert Brooks situation too. How am I going to go ahead and put this hothead in an area where we have other hotheads? That's an inferno waiting to happen. Again, so if you're at a point where you lose your temper quick and you have trouble controlling your emotions and you know yourself best, I think you're putting yourself at risk and you're putting others at risk. One thing with my family is they know the job is risky. They know. I mean, you're working in a prison. You're working against the worst people. People that have committed crimes. So they know that there's an inherent risk to the job. But outside of that, my wife knows at some level I have control of my temper. I have control of my emotion. I may not have so much control of the situation, but to some extent I have control of myself. So I'm not going to heighten the risk. So I think when she sees me off at work or when the kids see me off at work, they have a trust in me, not the situation, but a trust in me that if I'm faced with circumstances that could be a bit overwhelming, they trust in how I'm going to carry myself to the best of my ability, so I don't make matters worse. And that's kind of what it is with me and my wife. My wife trusts me enough to survive this profession because she knows that I will do my best not to make matters worse. And that's the only thing I can promise my wife. And when I go to work, whatever it is, I can't say, hey, today's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. I don't promise that. I just say, just trust in me to know that if a situation happens, I won't make matters worse. And I think that's fair.
So in other words, Anthony comes home from work and he goes straight to the basement.
All the time. Yeah, it's true. Once I came home, it automatically matters become worse. All right, guys. I guess wrapping up. What do you got, Joe? Closing remarks?
Yeah, for the rookies watching this, I hope you guys can take pieces and bits of this and apply it to yourselves. If you can, help your coworkers, apply it to them. Work with them. Work with each other. Get yourselves in a good place in an even tempo, and ask questions. Continue to ask questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Keep them coming. We'd love to answer them.
I agree. And Russ, what do you got?
I think that this particular conversation really probably falls better aligned with something that maybe the FTOs can use out there in order to talk to the rookies and give them some insights on these things. Especially since there's a reticence to ask these questions. Put it out there to them. Take this thing, make it into a whole lesson for them, and see where they're at with it. And I think that would be a great use of this particular message.
I appreciate that. I mean, when we thought about doing this, guys, we're trying to see what we can give more to our rookies in some of these episodes. We've done a lot more over the last couple of months for rookie staff. I have a book coming out for rookies because I feel there is a gap. So I think these are questions that we thought of, or I thought of. I mean, let them know. That's the key of it all. But I think these are questions that could be asked, but some people don't. So for the rookies that are watching this, hopefully this, if we didn't ask the question that you may have wanted to ask, hopefully the thing about the show was that it gave you the momentum to go ahead and ask the questions. Because if Russ, who is 7'2", it's crazy, 7'2",
not even
and he
close.
can ask questions like, Sarge, today I feel vulnerable. Could you imagine a 7'6" 2 officer going up to a sergeant like myself who's 5'5", looking down on me saying, Sarge, I don't know if I can complete the shift today because I feel slightly vulnerable.
Hold me, Anthony. Hold me.
Hold me. Sure, give me your leg. As always, guys, the show is here. So if you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's gonna notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.